Apparently.
Hey everybody, welcome to Genesis Office Hours episode number 41. This is December 18th, 2004, the final podcast of the year from Genesis Office Hours. And to bring home the holiday season, I've saved the best guest for last. So anybody that's been on the show before now, you should just take offense immediately that I didn't save you for last. But today I've got two awesome Genesis developers. I've got Jared Atchison. Hey Jared. You can speak. Are you muted?
I think he was saying he was audio issues right before he went live.
Oh, okay. Oops. Okay. And then I've got Bill over here. How you doing, Bill?
Hey, doing great.
All right. Well, Jared, we'll wait for you to catch up with us. So if you're listening live right now, a couple ways you can participate. Well, actually, there's one way you can participate, and that is to tag a question on Twitter with the hashtag GOHchat, and we'll get those questions to Bill and Eric here on the, I just said Eric, Bill and Eric. Bill is in Erickson and Jared is in Atchison. On the air, if you are not yet subscribed to Genesis Office Hours, you can go to carrydills.com/podcast. Nope, just kidding, /subscribe, and subscribe to the newsletter to get updates on the show. And Jared dropped out. He'll get back in here. Daniel, thanks for the hat mention. Since it's the holidays, I thought I'd go ahead and bust that out. And all right, so Bill, what's going on in your world?
Nothing, just staying busy, trying to get a bunch of sites done before the New Year's.
All right. Do you typically book by the week, or are you projects going a little bit longer?
Well, I mean, I schedule initial development for a certain number of weeks, so 2 or 3 or 4, depending on how complicated it is. But then it lasts as long as it takes to get all the changes done and make sure the site's good to launch. So it can take a little longer for some projects.
You're one of the most systematized guys I know when it comes to the onboarding clients, setting expectations, and then executing on a calendar, and later on in the show we'll dig into some of the specifics of that. But I've admired you from afar, and that sounded kind of stalkerish. But anyways, you've got some great systems, so looking forward to what you can share with us today. And Jared, I'll let you properly introduce yourself.
Sorry, I don't know what happened in our last audio, so just restarted. Yeah, I'm Jared. I'm a WordPress developer who primarily uses Genesis for my site development. I've been using Genesis since, I don't know, basically the beginning, I guess you could say. And yeah, that's the gist of it.
Genesis since the genesis of Genesis?
Yeah, almost. Pretty close. I mean, I think Bill started maybe a little bit before me, but we were kind of the early adopters, you could say. So.
And Bill, how did you stumble on Genesis?
Well, I was a thesis developer for a long time, and back when it was the only theme framework out there, and then I worked on that for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, and then there was some drama regarding GPL and stuff like that, and people told me, like Matt Mullenweg and Mark Jaquith, that they recommended that I switch to something else. So then I started looking at the other options, and at the time I think all there was Woo Themes' Canvas and then Genesis. So I took a look at them. Genesis looked really solid, and I seemed to like it the best. So I hopped in there and started the slow transition of moving my clients over there. And then, but Brian Gardner really helped out because he saw that I was trying to move my business that way, and so he sent me a bunch of leads, and that jump-started everything. And since then, I've been using Genesis for everything.
Yeah, you're the Genesis guy. When I was getting into WordPress about 4 years ago, I hadn't even settled on Genesis yet, but my dad came across your website, and he's an Aggie, like both of you guys, and so he was drawn to, yeah, I heard the whoop on there. I think he was drawn to your Agginess, but he sent me your site, and he's like, oh, here's an example of a guy who's doing WordPress development, and he looks like he's got his act together. And so even from the very beginning, look to you as a model of how to do things well. So you should, again, not only am I stalking you, I've also got my entire family stalking you.
That's good to know.
So talk about, like, you said that Brian Gardner was kind of feeding you leads, but How was moving from another framework over to Genesis? Was it just sort of a matter of learning what the actions and filters and all that kind of stuff?
Well, yeah, it was a big learning process because it's a code base I wasn't familiar with, and it was a different approach. So I had to sort of rethink how things came together. But and the other problem was I had a great client base, but they were all looking for a certain product that I didn't want to serve anymore. And so I think that what was even harder than the technical switch was trying to leave a successful market behind for an unknown. So I have clients asking me for this, but I don't want to be building on that anymore, and moving to something else and hoping that some of the clients will follow and I'll find some new ones. So I think that leap was the hardest part from the business perspective. And but luckily, after a few months of being on there, getting to know the framework and writing some tutorials and stuff as I learned my way through, I developed a bit of a following and found some new clients that way.
All right. Now let's go back to the college years. What were the majors? Jared, start with you.
I was technology management, so that's basically kind of like a info systems light, managed networks at hospitals or ISDs or something like that. So I was kind of more of a networking guy is what my major was.
And I was a finance major, trained to be an investment banker right as the whole financial world blew up and all my friends were losing their internships. And I actually got started in web design, I think freshman year of college, because the business honors program that I was in, they needed a website, and so they hired me over to the summer to figure it out. And so I'm like, oh, this is pretty fun. And then but then I found that they were constantly sending me change requests where they would like copy an entire page of text and make a few word changes. So that made me want to figure out how to build them a CMS to use it. And so once I finally figured out WordPress and got that site running on a CMS, I started building some other sites for different people in the business school and then some other departments and stuff. And so I sort of had my education in finance, but I had this little side business in web development. And then come 2008, 2009, it's like, I think I'll stick with the web development. That looks a lot more fun than trying to go to these banks that are failing. And so yeah, it was, I'd say right when I graduated in 2009, that's when I like really committed to web development full time.
Okay, so you rolled right into it. And Jared, was that the same for you?
No, not at all. I kind of took the longer approach. I always joke with Bill that, sometimes I feel like, he never got the work for the man, so I have that on him. But no, part of my major required that I get a internship. Like I had to have one to graduate. So I actually ended up getting an internship at the university as more or less a web developer. And so I started working with them, and kind of actually the same thing Bill was working on. I mean, a lot of static sites or whatever. And so at that point, I was doing WordPress development, but it was kind of a hobby and for small businesses and stuff like that, nothing hardcore. So when I was at the department at the university, I kind of sold them. There was a real big internal rift on like, do we want to go with Drupal or go with WordPress? And so most people don't know, I actually did like almost a year stint in Drupal, went to like the whole DrupalCon and stuff like that, which is a nightmare. But long story short, I convinced them to go with WordPress, and then I graduated, took that internship, turned into a full-time job, worked there for probably about 2 years or so, maybe. And then, I saw Bill, my first thing was funny. My first time kind of exposed to, the opportunities out there was WordCamp Houston, which, rest in peace, they don't do anymore. It was a great WordCamp, and Bill was speaking on it, and I was there, and it was my very first WordCamp ever. It was probably back in 07, I think, 07 or 08. And yeah, so I'm watching Bill up there giving his presentation. Of course, he's, dressed all sharp like he always is. And he's telling people, he's describing in his presentation what he does, and I'm like, well, shit, that's almost what I do. I'm just doing it for the university, but I mean, and he sets his own schedule, and obviously all the perks of being a small business owner. So, kind of once that kicked off, and then of course me and Bill became good friends, anyways. But that was when I was like, okay, well, I know this isn't gonna be an overnight process. I wasn't foolish to think that, but started moonlighting and kind of doing stuff on the sides, and it was about a year process from me ramping up clients, same thing. Brian sending me stuff, and then about a year later, I was able to transition to full time. So.
Awesome. And then, do you guys work together on just here and there, or only on certain types of projects, or never? You hate each other?
I don't think we've actually worked together jointly on a client project yet. We've quoted, there's some large projects that we've quoted on jointly, and we haven't gotten those. And I think we've both worked on each other's projects. So like he'll build a site, and then he'll be busy, and so the client will hire me to do something, or vice versa. But we haven't actually collaborated on a client project. We collaborate on a lot of
internal stuff
like base themes and a CRM and stuff like that. But yeah, hopefully now that we're both working on some larger sites, next year we might work on some projects together.
Well, that's a perfect lead into a question from Leonica, and she wants to know if you have a particular starter theme or favorite theme that you use as a base. And I think I'm hearing that it's your own collaborative.
Yeah, so we have a base theme. So I have one that's public that's pretty old. I think it's called like BE Genesis Child. And so we have a child theme that's very similar to that. It's just switched over to HTML5. Has like I just updated the style sheet to be HTML5, and it has a few other small tweaks in it. But yeah, we keep that, and we have a core functionality plugin, and that's sort of our base that we start everything from.
It's very similar to the sample theme, except actually more simple. I mean, we just ripped a bunch of stuff out and kind of have some. We kind of ended up over the years working off each other's code. We kind of structure our stuff the same way now, so it's just kind of things are reorganized, and we kind of hook into after theme setup and just have things structured the way we like it. So.
Awesome. Well, for everybody listening, do yourself a favor and go over to GitHub.com and do a search for these guys' profiles and look at their code, study their code. Tons of great snippets out there. And Bill, I think you even have. Do you have like a BillErickson.net/snippets page?
Yeah, BillErickson.net/code. It has a lot of code snippets in there. I used to write tutorials. I still do that every once in a while, but I found that. The act of sitting down and spending a few hours writing a whole post about something would prevent me from sharing it, and so I have a code snippet section where I just paste code and maybe 1 or 2 line description. So it's a lower barrier to entry, so it has a lot more content over there, and that's where I keep a lot of stuff for me. So when I'm building a site, I'll just have that open, and I'll just Command F and search for what I'm looking for.
And are you a Sublime texter?
No, I use Coda.
Okay. How about you, Jared?
I hopped on the Sublime Text bandwagon, and once I found that, I haven't really been able to. I've tried some other stuff, NetBeans and a few fuller IDEs, but always go back to Sublime Text. So.
Me too.
Actually, I was just going to mention this because I was watching this the other day. I don't have the link handy on me, but I found it on Hacker News about 3 weeks ago, and maybe we'll stick it in the show notes. If you are a Sublime Text user, the fellow WordPress dev who does some other stuff, he released some Sublime Text tutorials, like a whole ebook with like a 20-part video series. I think I bought all of them for like $60 or something, because if you use Sublime Text, you know that like you probably will never know more than 5% of the functionality. It's just so vast. So yeah, if you want to increase your productivity, I mean, I've been using Sublime Text for probably 2 years, and I've been like reading through this ebook and watching the videos, and it's been pretty helpful. So.
Nice. Yeah, if you can rustle up that link, we'll share it.
Yeah, I'll find it
on Twitter in the show notes, and that sounds like something to do over the Christmas break when, I mean,
exactly.
When you get tired of football.
Yeah.
Turn over and get
or family.
Or hey, that can happen pretty quickly. All right, we have a question from Steve, and this is for you, Bill. After a project is complete and paid for, and this is an interesting caveat, but still on your server, do you ever charge for new features? I'm not sure why it matters if it's on your server, or if that's even. Let's start with that first. How do you typically move? I mean, do you host anybody, or are you moving them off somewhere?
So there's like a few phases. I start with initial development, and so I'll schedule that for 2, 3, or 4 weeks, depending on how difficult it is. And then we get into the modification phase where the client can send over change requests for either design or functionality issues. And we usually go through a few rounds of that. I don't limit them on the amount of changes or the number of times they do it. I just, and there's some technical wording I do, but basically from when I finish the set of change requests, you have 3 weeks, and then if you don't make any requests then the project's done. So basically if someone disappears for 6 months and then they ask for changes, it doesn't completely ruin my schedule. And so then once the project is determined done, so either they approved it or they haven't had any changes for a really long time, it can sit on my server as long as they like. Most clients obviously want to launch their site when it's done, but some like to build content out while it's on my server, and so I'll let it stay there as long as they'd like, and then whenever they're ready, I'll migrate it. But if at any point there's changes either after the project's complete or while we're doing it, but it was outside of scope, it's of course going to be out of scope work, and so billed separately.
All right, Jared, would you add anything to your processes there?
Nope. Our workflow at that point is pretty identical. We've gotten to where we've kind of, anytime he makes a workflow adjustment, he bounces off me and vice versa. So we've kind of taken like the good parts of each other's workflow, and at this point we're not exactly the same, but I'd probably say 75%. So.
All right. We've got a question from Ben, and this is for everyone in the panel, and I just like calling this a panel just now. But starting with you, Bill, what are your business goals and New Year's resolutions?
Well, I have a few. The first thing is I'm working on a revamp of my website. So my current site, it works pretty well. I mean, obviously, it's getting me all the leads I have now, but I think it could be refined. It could describe what I do better. And so I'm working with a designer to improve more the wording and the user flow of my site. In the same vein, one of my goals is to decrease the number of bad leads. So I want to limit, like right now I get a lot of leads, but a lot of them aren't good fits, and I think it's because I don't describe what I do well on my site, and so I'd like people to be able to, I'd like to be more clear about what I do, so less people who are contacting me for things that I don't do.
That's interesting, because I would say you're extremely clear about the service you offer, but is it they're asking how to scope? Like, if you don't know where to fit them within that offering? Or what do you mean by that?
Well,
a lot of people just ignore it.
Yeah, a lot of people just ignore what you say on your site, and so adding a little bit more information there. So I mean, I have a lot of deep content that describes what I do, but it's easy for them to glaze over it. It's sort of like when you hit my homepage, it's a link farm. There's no real useful information there. It just sends you off to other places. And so I'd like to sort of like narrow it down a bit more so that I know there's not so many different ways where you could land on my site and say, oh, he thinks this guy looks like he's okay, I'm going to send him an email. I'd like them to sort of work through a process. And likewise, I might add some more things to my contact form. One of the adjustments I made, I think it was last year, was adding a little part next to my contact form that says what I'm scheduling projects for, because one of the many things that could immediately eliminate a project is if they want it next week and I'm booked up for the next month. So adding that there really helped decrease the number of time-sensitive ones where I wouldn't be a good fit. And so I might do something similar budget-wise, say these are the types of projects and these are the type of prices. I'm not exactly sure what yet, but yeah, I'm just trying to work on improving my communication more than I am doing now.
I totally borrowed that currently project or scheduling projects out, X number of weeks, and found that tremendously cut down on the "oh my, I need this tomorrow" type emails, yeah. Which I don't think anybody really wants those anyway. But here's the secret I want to know, because I know you're very systematized. Did that date, was it set to automatically change based on some other data point, or were you just manually running your
It's manual. So I keep track of my projects in Google Calendar, and so I just have scheduled events for each of my projects, and they block off whole weeks and stuff. And so then I just look for when my next availability is, and when I book a project, I then go to my website and update it. And I don't know if you've been looking at my site recently, but everyone, I guess, wants to schedule their projects before the end of the year. I just booked up, I think I was scheduling work for January 12th on Monday, and now I'm scheduling it for early March. I just flew through my calendar.
Do you ever find that, and I know, sorry, Jared, we're going to get this question to you in a second, but I know you charge, and correct me if it's changed since I heard you last say it, but 50% upfront just to get that space on your calendar. Is that still?
It's 25% upfront to get on the calendar.
25, excuse me.
Yeah, and yeah, that's how I've been doing it for a long time. I used to try a few different options, but I really optimized because I found that this is sort of like the best fit. A lot of people do 50 upfront, 50 on completion. So 25%, it's a bit less than everyone else, and it's enough for them to be committed, and so that you know that they're not just going to delay and cancel the project at the last minute, but not so much that it will hold them up from wanting to commit to you.
Gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense. And especially if you're booking several months out, that they've got a little bit of skin in the game to follow through on their commitment.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jared, I'll toss the question to you about New Year's plans, business plans, resolutions, that sort of thing.
Well, first, I'm going to start off the year kind of in the same route Bill's going. I got Rafal to hired him to get me a new awesome design, which he just finished, thankfully, before his baby arrived. So I have that in hand. So that's going to kind of be my Christmas/early January project, is to kind of get that new theme up and retailer some of my content. So it's creating a new site that's going to target better than what I do, and then I'll start split testing or trying to see, is it targeting the right people? It is targeting the right people, but my conversion sucks. Like, just kind of paying more attention to that. I want to start blogging a little bit more just to kind of get my traffic up. I haven't really blogged anything since 2012 or 13. It's pretty sad, but yeah. So those are kind of the immediate things, and really, it's just kind of every year. I mean, I sit back and look at 2014 and see. I mean, like Bill, I'm a big proponent of systems. Like, you hear a lot of developers that, well, I want to, increase my revenue by 50%. I want to, spend more time with the family. I want to whatever. Like, those are really good goals, but at the end of the day, like, you can stare at them on your wall as much as you want, and if you don't put the systems in place to achieve that goal, like, it's pretty worthless. So I prefer to kind of sit down and daily. I have a daily schedule that I try to stick to most days, and okay, well, what changes can I make in the schedule to help me, the outcome, which would be your goals or whatever. So that's kind of like something I enjoy, is life hack on productivities and systemizations and stuff like that. As far as learning more about that, I'm always reading more about that and trying to see how I can be more efficient with that type of stuff.
You hit on a golden nugget, and that is that goals are really pretty much worthless until you put some meat around them with action plans or some systems. Actually spent the last 48 hours going through and looking in detail of this past year. I wrote a blog post on it, just published it earlier today. But same thing. I mean, I set out these percentage type goals, and publicly, that's what I'm sharing. And I shared a little bit of the meat behind how to get to those. And then privately, I went and actually, put numbers to that. And okay, if I'm going to hit these goals, there's going to have to be some aggressive steps and action taking. It's not just going to magically happen. A year from now, I can look back and say, and check all those goals off. So good advice. Put some systems in place. And I would have to agree with both of you to improve the way that I am attracting new leads. I currently, I've changed my contact form enough that I've gotten rid of a lot of undesirable leads, but of the leads that come through my contact form, probably maybe 5%, and that's a rough guess, but 5% make it past the wall to where we're actually having a conversation about doing a project together. And that's extremely low. That means I'm wasting my time and wasting other people's time to even bother contacting me if I know that we're not going to be a good fit right up front. So I will echo that that's what we're working on. So Ben, I hope that gave you a little insight. Okay, this is a dirty question. It's from the vendor, and he wants to know, Bill, do you ever think of trying Thesis again, or using any other framework besides Genesis?
Well, can't say what I'm going to do in the future. Who knows where things change? But I'm pretty happy with Genesis, and I don't see anything making me not want to use Genesis. I have on a few projects, clients have requested a non-Genesis theme, and so I looked around, and I think underscores would be my next choice to build upon. And there'd be some instances where I think that might be a better fit. But a lot of times, I mean, I'm really good with Genesis, and one of the values that I bring is my deep knowledge of Genesis allows me to build sites much more efficiently and quicker, which is cheaper. So if I were to use another platform, it would be a lot more expensive because there'd be a lot more learning involved. And so in that case, it's a better fit for them to probably go with someone who's an expert in that other platform.
Sure. Jared, what would you say?
I'm pretty much in the same boat. I mean, I don't know if you can call underscores a framework or a starter theme or whatever, but I've again probably gotten the same leads Bill's gotten here. But people who want, for one reason or another, like don't want to use Genesis. So I've looked into alternative options, and really underscores was kind of the top option. Like if I ever got one of those leads, that's what I would use. I also know like the hybrid framework, they do some pretty cool stuff. I don't know if I would. Like I really like what they're doing, but it'd be a pretty big learning curve for me, so I've never really looked into it more. But those are kind of the two things I would consider if I ever, for whatever reason, had to. So.
All right. Well, along those lines of talking about other frameworks, putting the lens back on Genesis, do you see any weaknesses in the framework or things that you would like to see improved?
Well, I mean, Genesis is a pretty mature platform. I don't think there's no large looming issues that need to be fixed, I don't think. If there were, we'd be on that and we would have fixed it. I would say my biggest complaint about Genesis is its legacy code, because it's been around for so long. It has some things in there, and I've been vocal about this before, like the blog page template, and there's some loops, and there's a lot of just stuff that was a good idea, or it was an idea at a time, and it might not have been the best way to implement it, but now that it's been introduced, we can't go back. But HTML5 actually was huge in that respect, because it was kind of like our ability to start from scratch. So HTML5, you have all new hooks, all new filters, and so that allowed us to fix a lot of the mistakes that we couldn't do in previous versions. So so I think most of the issues that I had previously got solved with the HTML5 version, and then the rest of it is just a few lines you add to your base child theme to remove the templates you don't want and don't use features, like remove the widgets you don't want using. And yeah, it's all stuff that's easily solved in a child theme, and it would be too much work to actually put into Genesis core.
So the framework right now is full of checks for if HTML is active, do this thing. If it's not active, present this other code.
Yeah.
Do you ever see that a time when that legacy code will be dropped completely, or is that just too?
They've talked about it, that and I don't know how much public knowledge is supposed to give there, but I don't think there is a version picked out for where it'll get dropped, but it is part of the plan to at some point drop the HTML4 stuff and then just stick with the HTML5. So all new themes are built with it. It's the way most people, like all the tutorials are doing it, so the majority of people using newer versions of Genesis are using that, and the people who are using the older version of the HTML4 version aren't getting any of the new features in Genesis. Like as new features come out, they're only on the HTML5 version. So I think at some point in the future, no idea when, it could be a year, it could be 5 years from now, but I think they will drop the HTML4 stuff to like cut the code base by a lot.
So we'll be on like Web 4.0 when. Never mind. That was going to be a terrible joke, so I'm just stopping it now. Jared, do you feel like you're getting the leftovers? Because I asked Bill these questions first.
No, you're fine.
All the good stuff.
Do you agree with that, Jared?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I have to periodically kind of explain that to clients, and I don't really know where they like get these ideas, if they're like reading the crap that Yoast tweets and responds on Facebook recently or what, but that is Genesis stale or there's no updates or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, we're purposely not adding the kitchen sink in there, like that doesn't, I get clients, well, does Genesis come with shortcodes? Like, No, it doesn't. Like, so it's I don't know. I'm happy with the way it goes. I mean, it's the new version that's going to be coming out is adding some. I can't even remember off the top of my head, but when WordPress does new core stuff, like I know one of the tickets I read was looking at the new core pagination function and stuff like that. So all the updates are doing a really good job keeping up with new functionality that comes up with WordPress. But like Bill said, it's at such a mature point that we're not going to add features, or they're not going to add features for the sake of adding features. That's stupid. So we're going to keep it lean and mean, and keep doing what it's doing. So I'm pretty happy with the direction of it's going, despite some of the complainers out there. So
if anything, I like the direction of Genesis dropping features. So removing things like widgets and stuff, and switching to WordPress core functionality like the pagination links when those have been added to core. So I think over time, as WordPress core adopts some of the things that Genesis started doing, Genesis can step back and allow WordPress core to take over there. And so over time, we should see less features in Genesis, because Genesis sort of guided the way for WordPress core, and now WordPress core can handle it.
Yeah, and they've done a pretty good job of that so far. I mean, they kicked out the e-news widget into a standalone. The Twitter widget's now out of core, so I mean they could probably remove some more stuff, but at least they've gotten rid of some of that. So
yeah.
All right. Well, Greg has a burning question, and it's not really burning, but I just like that adjective. Do you guys ever get nervous going into a project that maybe you don't know enough, or just feel pretty confident about the projects you're taking on? Let's do this.
I'll let you take that, Jared.
That's a good question. Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I don't put myself in the position where I like go into a project and literally ask myself like, holy crap, am I going to be able to do this? I don't like to take risks so extreme that there's a good chance where I'm just going to like not be able to do it completely, or won't be able to finish the project, because you're not doing your clients justice. If I have a project where I feel like I'd get like that, I just tell the client I'm not a good fit and try to send them to someone who is. So I think that's one good thing to kind of avoid that is, take on. It's good to push your comfort zone, but at the same time, you don't want to do a disservice to your client and just completely have to learn something new on their dime. But I do to some extent, but not to the point where I'm just freaking out or anything. So
I just echo what Jared says. I try my best to only take on projects that I know I can fully deliver on, whether that's I built this before or I have a good idea how I'm going to build it. I actually find that on the larger projects, I spend a ton of time doing my quote, because a large part of that quote is my scope of work document, which defines like the functional features I'm building, and I really do a lot of the logic of figuring out how stuff's going to work there. So I'll get the design files, and then I'll walk through it and come up with how I would build that. And so a lot of that questions are answered before I started, and then when it's time for me to get to the coding, I have my scope of work document open in the theme files, and I can just walk through the logic I've already done. Because when you're down in the weeds, when you're working through the template files, you might miss the overall approach, and it's good to make a good game plan before you actually start developing. And if I don't know how to solve something before the project starts, then that's something I'll talk to the client about, saying, I don't know how to do this. We should bring in someone else who's more experienced in this particular area, or give them advice on a way that we could do it in an area that I'd be familiar with.
Yeah, and I think that's something important to note now that I think about it. And I'm not saying any Genesis developers do this, but if you're on certain Facebook groups like Advanced WordPress or whatever it's called, you see a lot of developers on there who basically are mid-development. Like they're clearly taking the job, they're working with the clients, and they're posting on there like, what plugin can I use to show testimonials or implement feature X, Y, and Z? You should never be in the point where the ink has dried, you've agreed to the contract, and you're trying to figure that out. Like, I'll take a project and might be an unknown, like I need to connect a custom API to a pet database or something like that. But I'm going to at least have a general idea of a plan of attack before I'm going to agree. So, yeah, I think that's important, is to kind of, there's okay to be somewhat knowns, but you need to have a game plan before you go into it, and not just take it and figure out you're gonna cowboy code and figure it out along the way, because then you end up with one of those people that are posting like that, and it just kind of does everyone a disservice, I feel.
I don't know if our audience could hear that, but that was a wild crowd applauding what you just said, Jared. That yeah, don't oversell yourself. Know where you're not strong, and it's totally okay to say that to a client and bring somebody else in that has that expertise. But don't fake it and then go hang out and online and try to figure out how to do it. Those are questions to ask before you sign a contract.
Absolutely.
So, have you guys dabbled in SaaS?
I've done it a little bit, but I haven't committed to it. I don't find as much benefit to it over normal CSS, because a lot of times I don't know, I'll be building on top of existing things where I have the normal CSS. It just seems like it would cause more issues. Especially when you're working with other developers who aren't familiar with it. It's just an added complexity, and I haven't found as much value. If I was working on a large project that I was maintaining for months and need to be very modular, I could see its value there. But when I'm building sites that are fairly small, like a week of development, I don't want to overwhelm it and add too many layers of complexity when a simpler solution would work better.
Yeah, so I'll pretty much echo what Bill says, and I'm pretty passionate about this, but I see that kind of all the time. So the answer to the question is I've played with it locally, but I've never had a project that I felt justified it, which I'll go into my next point of. I think other developers out there need to kind of be careful of over-engineering their workflow, and I see that a lot, and I think it kind of affects profitability on some people more than they know. So, for example, I don't use Vagrant, I don't use Sass, I don't use. That's not saying I haven't played around with it, to just kind of install it locally and stuff. But you need to make sure, like, if you're doing a 10-hour project and it takes you 2 hours to like set up this local environment, like it's probably not the case. My average project turnaround time is, not high enough, and I'm only working with myself. I'm not working with other developers, where I don't see the time benefit in using some of these tools that are a little bit more complex. Now, if I worked for an agency, Web Dev or 10up or Crowd Favorite, where I'm working with a team of people, or even if I was working on a project where I know I'm going to be on a retainer for the next 6 months and the project's going to be really big, well, in that case, I probably would look at SaaS, because the site's going to be kind of unwieldy. I'm going to be working on it long term. But if it's one of these projects, like, a lawyer comes to me and he wants, a $5,000 site and stuff like that, like, there's no cost benefit, to do that in SaaS, or to set up a Vagrant and all this stuff. So I think it's just, you got to be careful sometimes of over-engineering your workflow, as I like to say. So.
All right, so it makes sense on some bigger projects, but on these smaller small business sites, it's probably not worth it, is what I'm hearing.
That's my take. I mean, I'm sure people would argue different, but
we're probably the minority based on what I see online.
Yeah, I agree.
I've played with SaaS. I have not fully implemented it in my workflow. I created a Genesis starter theme that uses SaaS, but it's not fully taking advantage of SaaS, if that makes sense. I just kind of took it that one step and have left it there to wilt while other projects have gone on. But I do think it's interesting. I love that you can do math with SaaS. That's a lot of fun.
That's actually a big thing. I think it comes up probably about once a year in GitHub on Genesis. It's like, okay, well, do we need to? They finally, I think, got Grunt and a few other things in there, but it's kind of the same thing. Well, should we convert to SaaS or less or anything like that? And Brian and team, to their credit, has always chimed in. It's like, we're not saying this isn't a good tool, but this is really just going to be a burden on support. People aren't going to understand it. It's just not the right direction for everyone. So.
All right. Well, going back to, we had a question from Jackie, and Bill, this is going back to you talking about that you asked that 25% up front to get on your schedule. Is that refundable if they opt for some reason to not follow through?
Yeah, it's refundable, but I do have a delay slash cancellation fee if something happens to the timeline within 2 weeks of it starting. So if they book with me and the project's scheduled in 2 months, and then a month later they say, well, we're choosing to go with another developer, then it's refundable. But if I find out the day before I'm supposed to start that the project's delayed, then they get charged a fee, and then we reschedule it for some other time. But I'm fine with refunding it as long as it doesn't get me in a position where I can't actually fill that slot with another project.
Sure, makes sense. We've got a troll out there. His name is Daniel Espinoza, and he wants to know why the Aggies have not hired a DC yet, and will that DC need to know how to birth calves?
I'll let Jared take that.
I don't know. We'll see. Will Muschamp's gone, so holding out for the Clemson defensive coordinator.
Okay, we'll see about getting some, maybe some Aggie logoed calf sleeves for the birthing process, and that is entirely too disgusting. And I'm sorry, everybody. I hope you're listening to this later on iTunes and not watching live, because that was disturbing. Okay, if you're just tuning in, well, you're kind of late to the show, but that's all right. You can catch the replay later. I'm talking with Bill Erickson and Jared Atchison, two of the most awesome Genesis developers on the planet, both of them located in Texas, which I don't think there's a mistake there that a lot of good things come from Texas. I mean, I might be a little self-serving in that comment, but okay. We'll take some more questions. Do both of you always outsource design?
Yes.
Yes, definitely. And I think most people probably don't know. I know I did, and Bill, I believe, started to, like, way back in the day, attempted to do design, and then quickly realized that that was not the gig for us.
There's a few reasons. First, I'm not a good designer. I am a developer, and so it's useful to have. And usually the client's not a designer either, and so it's usually a good idea to have someone with a design eye who's deciding where things come together. I've also found that the main thing that really helps me, even if I was a designer, is by separating design and development, you get a much better defined scope. So you create the picture of what you want your site to look like, and then I can provide an accurate quote on development, and it limits scope creep because we can look back at those designs. If you're asking for something that's not in them, it's obviously outside of scope. So people who do design plus development, if you are able to do both of them, I would still encourage you to separate the phases because it makes you it limits scope creep a lot. And I found that even when a client says, oh, well, I'm happy with this theme, we just need to make a few changes.
Never works that way.
It never works that way. There's a lot more iterations than if we had an approved design. Because with an approved design, I know how to build everything out with a sort of iterative process. It just drags on for a really long time because they say, well, maybe make that blue, maybe make it a little bit bigger. There's no... it just gets in the way, and it makes it really difficult to deliver on a timely schedule.
One of the things that we've talked about a lot on the show in the past is, for those of us who are developers or for those who are designers, how do you find those people to partner with? So any tips for success for maybe finding a good designer or developer partner?
The best tip that I've found is look at your clients. So when a client brings you a great looking design, ask them who designed it. And most of my designers that I have in my recommended designers list were ones that clients had found before me, and so they shared their information, and so I keep working with them. But yeah, that's the best source. The problem with asking other developers is if it's a designer that's known to other developers, they're probably really busy and booked up because there's very few designers that are well known by lots of developers and not already booked up. So it's hard finding an available designer that's can work within your budget. And looking back on past work, like the clients, what they're bringing you is a good way to find someone who would be a good fit for you moving forward.
Great tip. Jared, anything to add to the mix?
No, I agree. I think all the designers that I've been working with consistently that I still like to work with were kind of outside the WordPress community, so it's not like I wouldn't have found them going to a WordCamp or something similar. So,
Any ballpark, like on what a typical design costs, or if that's something that's like, do designers charge per template, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, all designers charge for different things in different ways, and in the same way that when someone asks what does a website cost to develop, you could use the same argument for design. But my sort of standard response is clients should budget about half for design and half for development, so that you don't end up, like if you put way too much of your budget in design, you're not going to have enough to hire someone competent to implement that design. And if you're putting all your money into development, well, the developer is not going to get a great design to develop. So if I'm charging $4,000 or $5,000 for a site, I tell clients to expect about that much for design.
Yep.
Perfect. Split that budget. So let's talk a moment about value pricing. That's come up a lot on the show. I don't know if you guys have dabbled in it, but when you're looking at a project, are you taking the whole of it and entering into some sort of value conversation with the customer, or are you just flat quoting based on your time cost? And how do you
I'll let
handle
Bill
that?
start with this one because I know he's very opinionated on this.
Well, I think the whole value-based pricing idea is a good one, but it depends on the service you're offering. When you're doing a value-based price, what you're really doing is you're providing a higher level of service because you're understanding what the client's needs are and providing them guidance on how to get there. But the problem with is when you're a developer, they've probably already gone through a project manager and a designer, and they figured out what it is they want. They have the design. They're telling you to implement it. So there's not as much room for that value-based, for me to bring too much value in there because they've already determined their direction. That said, there are ways from a development perspective to bring value, and that's mostly the way I do it is through technical expertise, like performance. So if you know you're going to have a large site, you want to hire a developer who knows what they're doing and can take the right approaches when it comes to performance and to limit bottlenecks. And also designing a good back-end experience for managing that content. So one of the things I really specialize on the larger sites is crafting the user experience, understanding what the goals of the client are. So how do they plan to use the site, and what's the most effective way to organize it? Because they assume you'll make a site that matches their design. That's a given, but there's hundreds of ways you could make that work in the back end. And
You don't want them editing like 50 widget areas, right?
Yeah, you don't want a ton of widget areas, or like if there's something that's post specific, you don't want a ton of options or widgets. It should be on the post page, or you don't want, if you're going to have a lot of metadata associated with taxonomies, you don't want to be using advanced custom fields because that'll destroy your database. You want to store it using a serialized array, and preferably something like, what is it, WordPress large options, or the extension that turns it into a post table. So there's a lot of techniques you can use to optimize both the performance but also the client's experience in managing that site. And so that's where I bring the most value. You can't really see that too much on the smaller sites because they're just sticking with the standard WordPress interface, which is why a lot of my work recently has been moving up to like more complex sites because I can bring a lot more value there.
So when you're scoping out that, let's say it's a week or 2 weeks or however long you think that project build is going to be, do you regularly or ahead of time do you say, okay, I'm going to need to get on the phone with you, dear client, at 3 days into this or at certain intervals to make sure that you're doing that good communication back and forth to make that good user experience on the back end?
Most of that communication happens before I start any development. So like I said with that scope document, I want to know how I'm going to build that experience before I sit down to write any code because I don't want to waste time going down the wrong path. So before I start the project, I figure out what it is they're trying to do. And sometimes it doesn't work because they're hiring you before they even come up with the design, so I'll give them a preliminary scope of work. But then when the designs get finalized, I'll prepare a much more detailed, finalized scope of work, and that's when we'll get on a phone and walk through how they expect this to work in the back end, what these different areas need to be managed, and so yeah, if I need to reach out to the client during development, it's because I made a mistake early on in not getting enough information. So usually there's not too much communication during my initial development phase.
Yeah, I'll pretty much. I mean, I'm the same way with Bill. That's all stuff that I want to have fleshed out during that initial scope. I mean, it goes back to kind of what we talked about earlier. You don't want to be kind of figuring this out. I mean, your goal or my goal is, in that the scoping and before the ink dries, you could say, is I want to make sure our expectations are level. I want to make sure that they're not expecting, X and I give them Y. So that kind of goes back to, I get the designs from them, and I'll usually hop on a call, and sometimes it takes a while, but try to walk through it pretty vigorously and make sure, like, okay, well, so this is going to be editable this way, like, how do you plan on managing this, whatever, and kind of taking notes or whatever, because I suppose it's personal preference, but once I start development, like, I want to fly through that, I don't want any stopgaps, so I want to have all that determined beforehand and fleshed out. So.
All right. Got a question, and this is your thoughts on. Well, let me frame the question first. So when you first enter the world of development, we all start somewhere. We're taking our baby steps. We're getting there, and there's products in the market that address those things like Dynamic and Genesis Extender and page builder tools. And they've kind of got a reputation as not, clearly as not being on par with what a developer would just whip out from scratch or a custom solution. But generally speaking, any thoughts on the products in that space, or do you tell people to steer clear and just go learn better PHP, or what's the story there?
I'll let you take that, Jared.
Yeah, sure. So I think those products certainly have a purpose. I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them, they whatever they do well. So I think they have a purpose. It's more for the type of audience, the people who hire me to do a custom site, that's going to take X amount of time and X amount of money, and they actually have to come to me with a design, which means they have to hire a designer and all this stuff. Like, it's not the same type of person that's going to get, Genesis design palette or whatever. So I don't really have a problem with those because I'm not competing for those people. I don't, those people wouldn't want to work with me. So I think they have a purpose. I mean, small business owners, and in some degree, you could kind of say the same thing about ThemeForest, right? Like, the themes are crap, or you can say what you want about that, but the people who go with those themes typically are the people who want to do it yourself. They don't have thousands of dollars to pay for a developer. What they have is $45 and a Saturday and Sunday night to sit down and create an About Us and do that. So I think some of those plugins are probably more effective than others, but generally I don't really have a problem with them because they don't affect like the people I'm targeting.
I agree with Jared. I like those tools that are out there because they make it easier and cheaper to build a minimum viable product. So when someone wants to build a website, they don't have to spend $10,000 hiring a designer and developer. They can go buy an existing StudioPress theme and install a plugin that'll let them change colors and upload their logo. Or they can use some sort of visual builder to build out their basic idea. That doesn't mean it's the right tool for everyone, but so is building something custom from scratch isn't the right tool for everyone. By working yourself up the price scale, you're getting more access to customization. So you're getting more time with a designer developer, getting more time with someone who can understand your exact needs and craft a solution for you. But as these tools come out, there are a lot of people who don't need all that solution. They just need a site that has their information online, and I like them for providing that. And I'd also lump like a Rainmaker in there. I think for on the smaller end, like those smaller $3,000 sites where they're like 2 pages that I build out, I'd say Rainmaker is a direct competitor there, and they're probably a better fit for a lot of those projects because for I don't remember how much it costs, like $1,000 a year or something like that, you can have a great looking site with a lot of great functionality in there, and it's fairly customized for your needs. And for people who just need a small site, those are good solutions. You don't have to hire a designer and developer to build something custom. You can do that your version 2 once you've figured out what it is you need and you're starting to make money doing that.
Yeah, I want to add too, we were talking about these plugins or these tools or whatever. Like we said, I think they're great. I don't really have a problem with the tools, but sometimes you'll see, like, I do have a problem with the way they're used. I mean, if you're charging someone $1,800 or $2,500 for a site, and you as a developer are using some of these tools to upsell your value, sometimes I think that gets a little questionable. You know what I mean? Like, they're paying for this top development service, and that's what they think they're getting, and then they're basically turning around and using this plugin to implement this because they don't know how to do it, which is sometimes fine. But then, like, when the site wants to grow even more past the point of what those plugins to do, then that's when, like, we have to kind of do things on our end to convert stuff, and it can get kind of weird. So
yeah, just be transparent about the service you're providing to the client.
Exactly.
If you're using these tools, make sure they know you're using them, and that's why they're hiring you. Don't pretend like you're building everything from scratch and use a plugin, and then the client might feel cheated because they're like, well, I could have bought that plugin for $40 and did what you did. So make sure the service you're providing to the client matches what the client wants you to provide.
Beautiful. You guys are so full of golden nuggets of information that we were not able to cover it in an hour span. So I'm begging you, will you come back on in 2015 for a second round of Genesis Office Hours?
Sure.
Definitely.
Okay, because if you said no right then, it was just going to be extremely awkward.
I think I'm booked.
Oh, actually, hey, I have a cricket sound effect. Here we go. Wait. Okay, and that was it.
Perfect.
Today. So everybody, we have reached the top of the hour, and thanks to you guys for just really fantastic information and also some great questions from you guys who are listening live today. If you are catching this show later, you can either catch it over at carriedeals.com/podcast if you want to see the video view. If you just want to hear the audio, you can go over to iTunes.com and download that there. Bill, where can people stalk you on the internet in a non-creepy way?
You can find me at BillErickson.net.
All right. Jared?
JaredAtchison.com or JaredAtch on Twitter is about where I am. So.
Okay, we're going to be keeping an eyeball on your websites to see how they evolve in 2015.
Right.
Looking forward to it, and wishing you guys and everyone listening out there a very merry holiday season. I hope everyone gets to take at least a day off and just enjoy your family. So with that, we will wrap up the 2014 Genesis Office Hours series, and we will see you again that first week in January. Until then, have a great many weeks. All right, thanks, guys.
See y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.